Greetings, gardeners. Well, it's that time of year again. Yes, sirree. It's time to think about what's going to get planted in the springtime garden. Now, here in Hawaii, things are, well, they're kind of different, and we can plant almost whatever we want to at just about any time of the year. And other than long day and short day issues, I guess that things grow. But that's not the case in most states of the Union. Most states of the Union have a clear growing season, period of time, somewhere probably between 90 and 300 days a year, depending on where you live. And then you got a cool period after that, or maybe it's downright cold. If you're in Chicago today, it's cold. So you got an inactive time of the year. Well, that inactive time is the time that you will be thinking about, what did I plant last year? What worked out well for me? What do I need more seed for? Is it time to make a seed order? The seed catalogs usually all come out during the month of January, and so on. So it's time to get the planning down, and for a lot of us, that means sitting in the chair with a seed catalog, or on the web with a seed catalog, and perusing through, trying to decide, oh, look at that, that's brand new, or oh, that looks delicious. Hey, seed buying is impulsive. I've loved it all my life. It's time we be thinking about that. Now, I have here myself almost all the seeds that I need for the year. I either have grown them myself and gathered them, or I have already ordered them in from several different sources. It is time that we actually start to open up the seed packages, and that would be in many different locations in the country. I mean, even if it's frozen solid in Chicago, it's time to start thinking, because so many seeds that we use in temperate gardens in the mainland are actually tropical plants. An eggplant, the pepper, the tomato. These are actually all tropical plants, and that's why we buy starts. You go out to the nursery, you get yourself a pepper plant so big and put it in the ground. Now, some of you, that is how you're going to do it, and so you don't need to worry about this. But if you're the sort of person like myself that likes to grow their own plants from seed, then this is the time of year where you'll be starting to plant the first waves. But if you're looking for very specific varieties, if your environment is special and you need particular types that might not be available, or you're looking for certain culinary qualities that you just can't seem to get in the usual stuff, well, the only way you're going to get it really is to grow it from seed. Well, you can come shopping down at Bill's Nursery, but it's generally growing that stuff from seeds. So now the seeds, though, all have different categories and characteristics. Some seeds are cool season, plants that love to grow during cool spring or fall weather. Other seeds, they love the heat of summer, and so you have things, for instance, tomatoes, eggplants, cucumbers, melons in particular, peppers. These are all crops that really, really, really love warm summer weather. So there is no point in trying to put them out in the field too early. On the other hand, there are crops like broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, kale, mustard, collards. These are all crops of peas. They love the nice cool weather that we get prior to summer coming on, or that we get, again, late summer going in through fall, depending, what sort of climate you have. Some of us, if you live in Alaska and you get an 80-day growing season, well, it's all going to go in the garden at one time. All right. But if you live in places, say, like California, you'll probably be actually gardening year-round, but you'll be doing the cool season crops in the winter and the warm season crops in the summer, and alternating back and forth. What I'd like to talk about today is the timing of when we plant these different types of seeds, so your plants are ready, so they're big enough, so they're not overgrown when garden time comes. There is a false impression I've run across it often, that by starting your plants really early and getting great big monster plants, that's going to give you a better garden. Well, actually that's wrong. Okay, because as plants become large and overgrown, they begin to lose their vigor. And plants that are already flowering, oftentimes by the time you put them in the field, like a tomato that has flowers on top, your yield will be reduced dramatically over a younger plant that wasn't so old. Now, it's not true with every vegetable. All right, crops like peppers. Peppers take a long time to come up out of the ground. The seed will take you, probably anywhere from 2 to maybe even as much as 4 weeks, depending on the variety, to get that seed to germinate. Most varieties take about 2 weeks. And so you won't even see a pepper for the 2 weeks after the seed's been put down. So then once the pepper comes up, it's really pretty small, and most of us like a pepper plant, say that's maybe in a 4-inch pot and maybe standing about so high when we set it into the field. So it's, got some structure to it so the wind doesn't beat it to death and so forth. And to get that pepper plant, you will probably have to start your pepper seeds either this month or next month. If you live in long climates like, Florida, California, here in Hawaii, well, you can afford to start the pepper plant seeds a little bit later if you want to. Again, in California, even though we had over 320 some days, I believe, for growing season where I lived, there was still a problem with weather and water. Plants that were put in early got the benefit of the soil moisture. Plants that were put in late would fight drought terrible, and on a really, really warm, dry year, late plantings were very difficult. The amount of irrigation it took to get them to grow was huge. Yet the same plants put in early in the year got the benefit of moisture and would take off and root much better. So I'm going to run down a brief list with some explanations here about what should we be doing with the seed now. I highly recommend that you would plant peppers, eggplants, and onion seeds. And that includes leeks and scallions and any other member of that family. That these things actually be planted very, very early, no matter where you live. January and February, anywhere in the United States, is appropriate for starting pepper, eggplant, and onion seeds. Now, the reason we start the onion seeds early is because they're very weak sprouters. The plants are wimpy when they first come up out of the ground, and it takes a long time to develop an onion that is large enough to actually be able to handle it, shake off the soil. I bare root mine. I'll grow them in 6-packs, little cell packs, and I'll put, 5, 6 seeds in each cell. Now, they don't all come up, but I'll usually end up anywhere between 2 and 6 onions per cell. And then I knock them out, shake the dirt off, separate them, and then stick them in one at a time into the garden soil. Well, it takes a long time, months, to be able to get an onion up to the size that you can actually handle it without destroying. So they have to be started early. Peppers, as I said, takes 2 weeks, even to get the seed out of the ground. They don't really grow that fast compared to like tomatoes, for instance. Starting your seeds in January or February, no matter where you live, is appropriate. Now, you're going to need some warmth because they like warm conditions. So you're going to be starting them in the window of the house. You're going to start them under artificial grow lights. I used to start them when I lived in the Midwest in my basement under banks of grow lights. And I had tables laid out on sawhorses that had heater mats, heater cables with a thermostat, so that the flats were all heated, so the soil stayed at about 75 degrees. And that would get the seed to come up very quickly. If the soil is too cold, the seed's going to linger. It won't want to come up, and much of it may die even if the soil's too cold and too wet. Eggplant, similar. It takes a while to get the seed up, faster than peppers, but It is a very tropical crop, and so it needs to be a large plant when it hits the field if you're going to get anything in a cold winter-type climate. You know, here in Hawaii, I can get away with sowing the seeds directly even at almost any time of the year. But still, at my elevation, eggplants are still growing. They're still fruiting out there, but they are not growing the same way they did back in June and July. The warmth of summer here and the long days do stimulate the plant. So same with peppers. I do have some fairly good-looking peppers still growing here, still fruiting, but they don't look anything like they did in the middle of summer. So even in Hawaii, we do have seasons for these crops. So the eggplants have to be started real early. So the first seeds that you pull out and put into the 6-packs or flats, whatever you got, would be onions, peppers, eggplants. That simple. Then we have the next wave of crops. And so there are plants like the tomato, for instance, very, very, very popular plant, most commonly planted garden vegetable in the United States. The tomato is a plant that grows very quickly, and it comes up from seed very rapidly. My experience is usually anywhere from 2 to 7 days is all it takes to get a tomato seed out of the ground. Now, I've seen people try to grow these things up into huge plants in gallon pots and all that stuff. Well, there have been numerous university studies done on tomato culture, and the studies all indicate that the perfect transplant on a tomato is actually only 3 to 4 weeks old. Only 3 to 4 weeks. That's a perfect one. You'll get the best yield from those plants. Now, if you grow a transplant that is somewhere between 6 and 8 weeks old, that transplant will make some tomatoes earlier than the 3 to 4 week old plant. But the yield will be reduced. It won't be reduced enough that it isn't worth getting the, say, 6 or 7 week old plant going. You lose maybe 10 or 15% of the total crop when you use that older plant, but you're going to get an earlier harvest of tomatoes, which is something that we all really want. And so once you get past 8 weeks old with a tomato plant, though, the yield declines, the vigor of the plant declines. It's not worth it because it just keeps going steadily downhill after the plant has been in a pot for longer than 8 weeks. Now, as far as when do you start the tomatoes? Well, since I'm speaking with a broad group of people living in many different climates at the moment, I think the best way to put it is give your tomato seed 7 days to come up. Now, it's probably going to be up earlier than that, but 7 days is a good figure, and so there's 1 week right there just to get the seed sprouted. Then I like to have my plants 4 weeks old when they go to the field. And so that gives you 5 weeks from the date that you put the seed in the ground to the time that you're heading to the garden. Most of us, for convenience, wait to plant on or up to a week after the frost-free date. Well, we all have different frost-free dates, and this is relatively easy to find. If you do a little research, you can usually Google it for your town, and you'll find out what's the average frost-free date. Let's say in Fremont, California, that frost-free date was February 15th. All right. For many of you, it's probably going to be closer to May 1st or May 15th, where I lived in Wisconsin. It was June 1st, and we'd still get frost on the 7th sometimes. But so let's say that my frost-free day is June 1st. Now you got to subtract backwards from there, and you go, all right, I want a 4-week-old plant, takes a week to come up, and so if it's going in June 1st, means the seed is sown at the end of April. Now that's if it's going in at the frost-free time, but maybe you want to try to stretch the growing season, and so you might use like a floating row cover or a plastic tunnel or hot caps or something over the tomatoes so that you can put them out maybe a week, sometimes maybe 2 weeks early. Let's say you're going to put them out 2 weeks early. Well, then that means that you're going to be sowing the seeds for planting out in the garden in the middle of May, somewhere out in the early part of April. All right. And so you just kind of time your planting for tomatoes ideally 5 weeks ahead of the frost-free date, or 5 weeks ahead of however early you plan to set them out with climate modification, like hotcaps. It's nice, young, vigorous tomato plants that don't have flowers on them when you put them in the ground are the best. Then you have another whole group of vegetables that we commonly start, and these are the cucurbits. That would be melons especially, usually start from plants, watermelons or cantaloupes or honeydew or charlene or whatever you're growing. Then you also have cucumbers, which can be direct sown. They can be direct sown. Melons also can be direct sown ordinarily in most climates, but a lot of people want to get the pickles made early, or they want to pick the melons earlier, so you will start the plants. Now, same with squash, for instance. All right, so summer squash like zucchini, winter squash like kabochas or butternuts, melons, cucumbers. We treat them all pretty much the same. Their habits are very much the same. And on those, usually the seed will take less than a week to germinate. But let's just say it takes a week to get it up. All right. Then after it comes up, you do not ever want to see your cucumber plant or your melon plant sit in a pot for longer than 3 weeks. If it starts to get older than 3 weeks, why, it's really got to decline, and you're not going to get near out of it what you might have. Problem is, once it hits the pot walls, it starts circling. And once it starts circling, you can't cut the roots back on these. Like, say you got a really pot-bound pepper. A pepper, you can go ahead, take a knife, and you can shear off those wound up roots, put it in the field, it'll take off, it's going to grow fine. That's the nature of a pepper. But if you take a cucumber and try to do the same thing to it, or a melon, you'd be lucky if you don't just kill the plant. You don't disturb the roots on cucurbits when they go in the ground. And since you don't want them root bound, you want them fresh and vigorous, you know, and young. That means 3 weeks, folks, ahead of whatever the frost-free date might be. Again, same with the tomatoes. If you want to try to modify the climate to put it out earlier for earlier crop, that's fine. And so you do your planning. I don't recommend you ever go out under most cases more than 2 weeks ahead of the frost-free date. Because cold soil is really hard on melons, for instance. Oh, cold soil is the death of the things. If you're going to go out early with melons, I recommend using a black plastic mulch underneath. That'll warm the soil so the plants will be happier. Otherwise, just wait till the frost-free date or a week past the frost-free date, and then just put them out directly without protection. So give yourself 1 month, no more, ahead of when that stuff's going in the ground. That's perfect timing. That gives you a week or so to get the seed up out of the ground, and then about 3 weeks in the pot, and the plant will be just about perfect when it hits the soil. It should be well meshed and transplant really well. So then we got a whole other group of vegetables that is commonly started again, and that's the brassicas, the cole crops. Now, that's even more complicated in a way to figure it out. In a lot of climates, you can do that crop either in spring and in fall, or you can, some cases, like where I lived in northern Wisconsin, you could grow it throughout the entire growing season. It was perfect there. It usually takes less than a week to get the seed out of the ground, but we can just go ahead and throw out that standard figure of 1 week to germinate the seed in the pot. Plants with cabbage and broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflowers, they really shouldn't be any more than 6 weeks old when they hit the ground, similar to the tomato crop. Okay, so you'll say give yourself 6 to 7 weeks or so ahead of whenever you plan to put it in the ground to sow the seed in the containers to get yourself up a plant. Now, cauliflower is a little faster, and it probably shouldn't be grown out quite as long in a pot. So, you know, plant the cauliflower a little bit later so it doesn't stay in the container for 6 weeks. Cauliflower, more like maybe 4 weeks in a pot is better, because if that plant gets cramped, forget it. It's shot. It'll button up, and it won't get anything out of it at all. Whereas cabbage, it's much more durable. If it does become pot bound, you can trim the roots, open it up, put it in, they'll usually take off and make you a head of cabbage no matter what. But anyway, at this very moment, unless you live in a tropical area where you might be planting tomatoes out in the garden right now, and that could be happening, but for most of you, it's time now to plant peppers, onions, eggplants. Stop there. Don't do anything else. Get those going, get them started, work with them for a while, it'll keep you busy, and then later start to think about the tomatoes. And somewhere in there, maybe if you can grow cabbages and broccoli, you'll be thinking about those. But then, even later yet, then you'll start thinking about melons, cucumbers, squash. Yeah, it's like that. Corn, if you start your own corn seed, which I, believe it or not, I germinate my corn seed in flats here. The reason why is the myna bird, maybe the cardinal too, that way. Generally, we don't have to start green bean seed, but if you're going to start green beans or hard beans, it's a similar process. You really don't want to have corn or bean seeds sown more than 3 weeks ahead of when they're going in the garden. And for most of you, that would be the first planting, at or around the frost-free date. You don't want to put the beans out or the corn out there before the frost-free date unless you're willing to put up with having to cover it. And if you're working with super sweet corns, okay, the corns all come in different classes. It's gotten very complicated these days. It used to be we only had 2 basic kinds of corn. Now we got a whole lot of different ones. And the super sweets also need to have warm soil. And so you could take an old-time Span-Cross Bantam or Country Gentleman or a good old hybrid like Silver Queen, for instance, and those sweet corns are very tolerant of cool soil. They can be direct sown ahead of the growing season if you're trying to force a really early crop, you may have to worry about frost protection later, you don't know, but so it is possible to direct sow early, but not with super sweet corns. Field corns, very starchy, very tolerant to cold soil. Popcorn, starchy, tolerant to cold soil. You can really put it out early. Conventional sweet corns, SU types, those, they have more sugar in them, but they're still fairly tolerant to cold plantings. The super sweets, though, the seed will just rot right in the ground. I find it's advisable to even use a heater cable underneath your super sweets if you're starting them ahead of time. But with corn or beans, if you're going to do that, it's 3 weeks ahead. That's it, no more. Anything longer than that, the plants will be cramped. Okay, that's about all I got to say for today. Rather than making this a confusing thing, it's all pretty simple. Time to plan your seeds out, time to order the seeds if you don't have them, time to assess what worked last year, what didn't, and so on, what are the new varieties and all that. Sit down with that catalog, and otherwise, if you've already done all of that back during December, today is a great day to plant peppers, eggplants, and onion seeds right now. If you live in a place where the growing season is very short, you might want to wait till February to do this, and you'll be fine with that, okay? But if you're in a place where you got a pretty early growing season where maybe you can put a pepper in the ground in April, say for instance, it's time to get started. Aloha, folks. Thanks for watching, and hang loose.